Welcome to today's community lunch. Hi, I'm JJ, and here I am with my sandwich. So we invite you to join us weekly as we bring in a guest each week to talk about a different topic around immersion and the extended reality ecosystem. Welcome, Mr. Collegeman, Dr. Clayton. Hey, brother.
Hello.
Dr. Clayton, thanks for joining us. Dr. Clayton comes to us from Air University with the Air Force. He's a leadership instructor with Air University and also in charge of the AR/VR initiative at the university, and that supplies training for everyone through that organization. Dr. Clayton, you've been a collaborator with me for years, and just an incredibly treasured partner in this new world of immersive technology. You and I both live in the world where we strive to bring the capabilities of immersion and the creation of these experiences to the everyday person, right? Which is the purpose of this network, Doc, right? As we take your knowledge, or the knowledge that like Aaron Collegeman shares with us on the site, or the direction that Caius takes us to try to give the questions before you know what to ask, right? That's the challenge, is not knowing what you don't know. And so today we're going to talk to a topic that is probably most important to me in my heart, and that is the significance of story to immersion. Now, I'll tell you before I turn this question on you, Doc, which is you giving me an idea of why you believe story is important to immersion. I will tell you that I actually believe the way we should evaluate immersion is the distance between the story and the participant. Right?
Yes.
That I actually don't believe immersion is about senses. I believe it's about your senses tying into a story. And I believe that's how we begin to develop understanding. I think story is how we develop understanding, how we develop compassion, empathy, and then eventually synthesis as we take these ideas and we combine them together in experiential learning moments. But Doc, talk to us, and then we'll open up the conversation to others about your thoughts on the importance of story to immersive experience design and the whole industry of immersion.
Yeah, JJ, thank you. Yeah, and you hit it on the nail, right? Is like the distance between the story and the participant is huge, because I think when oftentimes maybe those in the immersive technology kind of world or industry, right, we talk about immersion and presence, I think we always try to view those definitions through a technology lens, right? So yes, when I make something immersive, I want somebody to have presence in an experience, right? We always think, I think we visualize something in our heads of some type of immersive technology, whether it's virtual reality or augmented reality or something else, even like location-based virtual reality, right? Which is becoming a very big kind of new industry, right? This experience-based economy or experience-based industry where you can walk in the Monet paintings. You go to Birmingham or to Atlanta or Chicago or something, and you pay a ticket, much like an escapology type escape room, but now you're actually literally in this 20 by 20 foot room, and the entire room is you're inside the Monet painting, right? But that's still, there's the technology part of it, but what is the underlying element, I think, right, that really does create immersion and presence, that is the foundation of any type of experience where you're talking about immersion and presence. And I think you hit on the nail, this distance between the participant and the story. And I think that's such a profound statement, And that's I think the simplest way to understand the power of storytelling, right? The distance between the participant and the story. And so, because and lots of people, like, it's the last thing on their mind. It's like, what technology do I use? How do I make it more virtual or more 3D or let me bring in sound just for the fact of bringing in sound versus saying, if I bring in sound, maybe let's say spatial sound, right? Not to bring it into the experience just for the experience, but to bring it in to enhance the story,
Yep.
right? That's the difference in the thought process, right? And so maybe bringing in spatial sound, let's say you're in VR or something, right, helps to bring the participant closer to the story, right? Versus let me bring in sound because it will make it more immersive, right?
Right.
And that's the difference, I think, that hopefully, I think, JJ, you've taught me, I think, a lot of this, something I had not thought through this as I started my journey into understanding immersive technology and built my VR elective here at Air University, where we've been putting, tons of students through for the past 7 years. The reason the course is so effective now is because we've had guest speakers like you and Aaron and others from this community that we've connected with to come and talk to my students, about not just understanding what virtual reality is or what it can do or what augmented reality is or what it can do, but how to develop the experience to create immersion and presence. And now we have whole lessons, more than one lesson on things like spatial storytelling and spatial sound and immersion and what immersion and presence actually is, and how it connects in that it's not always about technology. So these are all things that, I would never have thought it would be maybe part of my VR elective, especially from a military perspective, where we think like, how do we train airmen and guardians, right? We use technology and we put them in simulations. We immerse them into, how to fly a plane and stuff. But what we're even finding now is like, what is the storyline? And I think I have an interesting maybe story, an example to kind of give you. Just this past month, about a month or so ago, the commander of AETC, General Robinson, visited Arizona State University, where he went through some of their experiences at ASU through a company called Dreamscapes at ASU. And their foundation of how they build VR things is all about storytelling. And so General Robinson goes through these experiences. You're on an alien planet in a biosphere dome, and you're trying to understand why these alien animals that aren't real are dying. And so now the ASU students have to learn about biology. One was like, literally, it looked like I was in Indiana Jones' Temple of Doom, but it was the storyline that was walking me through trying to find the curse of the lost pearl, or trying to find this pearl, right, kind of thing. But it was a storyline. So General Robinson goes through these experiences and goes back to AETC, and he's leading all of education and training for the Air Force. And those experiences made him think, like, that's the kind of immersive experiences that we need to be bringing into education and training, versus what I think what we normally see, especially in the Air Force or probably across the military, is I need to bring in an immersive technology to be able to train my pilots better, right? A VR
Yeah.
simulation, a firefighter simulation, a security forces simulation. And what I think General Robinson is seeing is these experiences were different, and their students were learning even way more than, like, let me just put you into a virtual reality biology lab and let you dissect a frog or understand what a virus is versus bacteria, and I can maybe do a simulation of VR to show you the difference.
Yep.
He realized that the students were going through a story, this experience of why these animal aliens were dying, and they had to understand the environment, what's going on. And when they came out of their VR headsets, the students then had the next week or two of having to go research what is a virus versus a bacteria, and understanding, right, these different compositions of things, of animals and stuff like that, which was on their own, right? They had motivation and agency to go figure these out. Students started literally making pins and stickers and dressing up for Halloween as these animals from this fictitious VR experience, which was their biology lab, or the experience to get them to have motivation to go do their biology lab stuff that they needed to do, right? So the learning wasn't in the VR experience itself. It was a story that they connected with so much that when the students left, the ASU knew the students would actually have agency and motivation, and desire to go and like they're researching because they didn't want the animal that they connected to die. They want to know, is it a virus that we're realizing? Is it a bacteria? And they had to go do that research and stuff. And so he realized that storyline is something that we're missing in most of our immersive technology simulations. Even when we have technical training type things, there can still be a story that connects the training that you're doing, whether it's in VR or if you come out of it. So yeah, you're exactly right on that. And we're in that process right now of developing proposals to the commander of AETC of across the Air Force of creating some type of an experience for whatever it is. For me, it's going to be on leadership competencies. There's a couple other proposals. One's looking at flight simulations. Another one's looking at how to marshal an aircraft on the flight line. But what the requirement that the commander of AETC and his staff have asked those in the Air Force that are pitching these proposals is that it can't be just a simulation. What is the story that's coming with it? And this has actually been challenging for the other teams that are proposing because they're so used to saying, like, I just need a VR simulation that's going to teach the airmen how to marshal an aircraft on the flight line. And he's like, but I need, what is the story? And that's the question. And you can see kind of this, not the blank stare, but the stare of others that have been in meetings with me that are doing these proposals, like, you guys are missing part of your pitch proposal. What is the story that goes along with this aircraft marshaling that you're saying is lacking in the training that you need? How interesting.
Well, and what I think you're saying is the story causes people to care, right? And what's interesting is not only does it cause people to care about a being in the story or a history of the story, but it causes them to care about finishing the learning moment, right? So getting people to care about their learning and to care about each other, I have an example of that too. You know the great experiment that we created at Shenandoah University with Dr. Obey and Warren Hofstra and Dr. Kevin Hardwick. Dr. Hofstra brought his students in to show our first proof of concept. Every character in VR was George Washington. It was the only character we had made. So they go into the constitutional debates, and they're each representing different characters from that historical debate. Pinckney, George Mason, right? And but they're all playing George Washington. Half of them are looking at a screen, half of them are in VR. At the end of this virtual debate, and really what they did was they took the words. First, they took the words of the historical moment and they just used them with each other. And then we let them rephrase those words in their own point in the debate. When the class was over, a half an hour later, two students, a theater student and a history student, are outside arguing their characters' points of view. If I can get students to care that much, now we're not slogging through learning, right? There are a couple things that I wanted to bring up based on your conversation that I'm interested in hearing some other thoughts. One is, I want people to understand the massive leap that goes in the distance between the participant and the story. For the last 3,000 years, we have been voyeurs on the side of the mountain watching a play that's happening away from us. We have a distance from the story. We've got a safety from the story. We can judge these people as much as we want. The evolution that's happening today is going from voyeur to protagonist in the center of the story. That is a massive transition. We can see it in first-person gaming, and we're watching it happen in media, right? Movies are becoming personalized. You can feel like you're standing in the center of the experience as if you are there, right? So the shrinking of the distance between the person and the story, you think of third person versus first person story. We're moving from third person experiences that we can create to being able to generate at scale first person experiences, right? So that's a huge shrinking of the distance between the participant and the story. It's placing them within it. And how much can we get within it? And then you've got various senses that you can tweak. There's even a way to do super human awareness, like having a secondary awareness over top of
Mm.
the primary experience that you would never be able to have without the technology. But something I wanted to bring up to your points of they just want to do a airplane simulation.
Yeah.
It's important to understand that all they're seeing is one element of story.
Mm.
So let's reach back 2,400 years to Aristotle, and let's ask Aristotle what he says the components of a story are in order of importance: plot, character, theme, diction, spectacle. Diction, music, spectacle, right? The least important is spectacle. That is the visual wow of the experience. Music is different, and diction is different, right? So the sounds fall into different categories. Spectacle is visual. All that they are taking from the story is the visual spectacle.
Mm.
They're missing plot, character, theme, diction, and music, right? And the music sets our tone before we in that transitional space. Dun 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 dun
Yep.
dun dun dun. Right? All of a sudden we have a feeling of what we're entering into, right? So I just wanted to bring up, even in story, spectacle is one of the elements according to Aristotle, but it is the only one many people are playing with because it's almost the easiest to control.
Yeah. Yep.
So I would challenge people to be thinking of the others. So just to go through them real quick: plot, right? We're talking about the structure of the story. What are the structural of the events that are happening? Character. What's interesting is when Aristotle's talking about character, he's not talking about the lumberjack, the father, the mother. He's talking about morality. Does the individual have character, right? And that character can be bad character, good character, right? He's talking about integrity, and he's talking about morality, right? And that's what defines the character, not what's their job, right? What's their position in life. Plot, character, theme. Theme is the intellectual abstract idea, right? And it could be something like uh, men are misogynistic, right?
Right.
I mean,
Sure.
we see movies like that, but it could be, all people are created equal, right? So therein you get the purpose of the piece, and that can be, fraudulent or not, as we all know. Plot, character, theme, diction is the spoken word, is the power of the spoken word, the language, the rhetoric, the direction, all of that that's coming out of that. Music, of course, we talked about dun 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 dun, because they had different themes that lifted you, that told you where you should be feeling, right? Much like
Yeah.
our movie, what do they call them? Operas, the epic movie kind of thing. Our Star Wars. And spectacle, which is the least, which is just the visual, right?
Yes. And that's where everybody
Um,
seems to focus. I think is
yep.
the visual, right? Is like, especially when it comes to immersive technology, right? How do let's what is it going to look like in VR? We want it to be more immersive, so we want to have really good high graphics, these types of things,
Right.
and that's the last part I think that is really needed, because the rest of because the students, I say students, but the participant will, if the other parts of the story, those elements are done well, they already have a picture in their head, right? They've already,
Yep.
right? And you're just getting maybe a little bit of that in whatever the visual is that you're going to provide to them. And it doesn't need to be the full picture, I think, sometimes.
Well, and we see the misperception of the general public, right? They think that it's got to be high fidelity, and you and I both know that high fidelity right now can create, a chasm, right? The uncanny chasm. It's almost
Yes.
better to be a little bit more cartoony, just to because we will empathize with those characters more, right? if we can stay in the flow and they don't kick us out of that.
Yes.
But story and the importance of story to the experience, and how do we design these things, and how do we think about these things? And I myself begin with the story. First, I need to know who's the participant, right? Um,
Yes.
uh, and then how do I build the experience for that participant? Because what we've said is the massive evolution, the unsolved new story challenge is that it's a first person story,
Mhm.
which implies agency and choice, right? How do we write for that? How do we enable that?
Mm.
Um, and the significances of that. So I've got a question. So let me open this up to Tim. Do you have any thoughts that you wanted to share with us, brother?
Um, well, I want to just reiterate a point. You're just beating it up. I think it's so valuable. Is we always try and set criteria for what we're doing, but the idea is not how it was. I just want to reiterate what Andy said. Basically, is it's not how does this element or asset improve immersion. It's how does it add to the story. And I just think that's a really critical thing. I mean, it's got me just reframing a lot of stuff that I'm even doing in communications and everything else. It is, if the story is at the center, then everything builds off of it. It isn't about, designing an experience for other people to say, look what I did in here, look how we added this. It should be invisible, essentially. So in other words, as you're adding these elements to improve story, they become invisible in the experience, and therefore you're even more immersed. It's not this blasting sound that comes out to alert you to an action, right? It's more situational or contextual to where you actively have to be more engaged, more focused, more things, because those elements, sound was the example that Andy gave, but that Dr. Clayton gave, forgive me for getting too familiar with you, that it really is. I realize that things are going to disappear the more they become part of the story. In other words, they're not as prominent and in your face as a sound or a noise or a shape or a movement. They're actually more seamless into so they're the things you have to look for. I just wanted to reiterate that point because it framed some things for me very effectively.
It's really lovely what you just said, and let me tell you how I heard it. Functions and actions have to be built into the story the way movie writers put exposition, right? It's got to be built into the story inherently without stepping out, right? And you can see writers who just deliver exposition. You're like, okay, I'm just here to get information for 15 minutes, right? I need to know all of this before the story. But really beautiful stories elegantly take you through an experience that reveal, right, these opportunities. Aaron,
Yeah,
do you have any? Oh, go
I
ahead,
was
Tim.
just make one more point, and I'll hand off to Aaron. And I was thinking it's also that's how you get, I think, closer to our real world, anyways, because we don't live. There's a challenge right now where when you move into these mediums like extended reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, you're kind of developing a hyper reality, which kind of numbs you to reality because things are so big that how do you teach somebody something if there's constantly a blue reference coming up or an orange arrow or a sound that dictates what you're supposed to do within the game that doesn't exist in reality? So,
That's right.
the more we introduce things that pull you in, the more it's a more lifelike of an experience you're having. And I would assume, I don't have data to back this up, but I would assume that it's a higher retention and transposition of that onto reality when you're in the real environment because it mimicked it so well.
Well, I can only imagine that Dr. Clayton is like dying right now with all the things that he has to say. I mean, everything from introducing us to the idea of flow, right? And what happens when you interject something, it creates a distancing between you and the experience. If you interject something that interrupts the flow, it's called the Verfremdung effect, right? In German, it means distancing or alienation, right? And what it does is when it kicks you out of the emotional flow journey, because emotion is tied into that flow, when it kicks you out, it pops you out of your emotional head into your intellectual head, because it literally has the brain say, what? What just happened? And then it's got to analyze why that happened, right?
Mhm.
Now, that is a very, very useful tool for experience creators. But if you've got pop-ups happening all the time, you're constantly breaking the flow. Think of it like an airplane taking off. Every time you break it, the airplane has to go back on the ground and take off again.
Mhm.
So before I bring in Aaron for a new thought, Andy, I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to any of that.
Yeah, JJ, yeah, spot on, right? And I was thinking of flow and flow theory. That's something that we talk about at Air University. Something I think you and I have talked about. It's something that we have. It's become a framework that we use with our students to understand when trying to create immersion and presence. Right? If you break flow, right, this emotional state that a person goes through, and if you think about flow in other areas, for example, if you have a hobby, right, that you like and you enjoy, and it's a skill that you're good at and it challenges you, you could be doing that hobby or something. Let's say you're working on a car, you're building a model rocket or whatever, playing or doing Legos, right? And all of a sudden you look up at the clock and it's 3 hours later, like, well, wait a minute, what happened? Right? Time flew by because you're in this affective state of mind, right? But if somebody came in and right and yelled at you or something, or the dog came through the living room, but that breaks that flow that you're in, that this focus that you have. And this happens in immersive technology. And one way to keep flow, especially if you're trying to ask the participant maybe to do something that could be challenging, right, that they may be afraid to do, or it actually might be too easy, so they might be bored, is to have story, right? So now they're in flow because of the story, not so much maybe of the skill. So the story is keeping them on this, I call it the carpet of flow, right? Even though that there's a skill that you want them to do. So for like pilot training, when we ask our airmen to go and do their pilot training, and they're in a VR simulation pilot training, and the goal is for them to learn how to land a plane, fly the pattern, right, in the VR. If that's the only thing you're doing, and if it's a student that's never done that before, right, it could be a challenge for them. So they might be stressed out, right? So that stress keeps them from staying in flow. But what if there was a storyline that went with this? Hey, you're a brand new lieutenant that's come, right, and you're stationed at this base for the first time, and you write this story, and and part of what the story is that you need to fly this plane, right? So there's a connection to the story versus just having to go do the thing. And we'll call this sometimes transactional distance theory, right? Where we're just doing the thing to do the thing, especially in immersive technology. So we've lost connection to others, we've lost connection to the experience, and when we lose connection to other people or to experiences or to the story, it's called transactional distance. And so the more transactional something becomes, the less self-efficacy you have towards that experience, because it just becomes a to-do thing. I checked the
Yep.
box, I did this. You see this with a lot of corporations that do like online training. I just got to go do this thing and check the box versus
Yep.
you're part of a story. So flow theory and transactional distance theory, and even CAMEL, cognitive affective model for immersive learning,
Yep.
right? Being in a story creates flow, and it creates agency, and it creates this affective state of mind. All these terms come back to flow and CAMEL, right? So the story, but it's the story that is the underlining element that allows the CAMEL model and flow theory and transactional distance theory to tell you, yep, the framework, the foundation of an immersive experience is story, right? And those theories tell you that.
And it's personalized story.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's a massive difference. We're not reading a novel about somebody else necessarily. We're
Yes.
probably experiencing something that's placing us in shoes that we need to be familiar with. I'll give you an example that I remember from the Air Force, right? So you guys training a commander to handle difficult conversations with people under their command, right? The person's a commander, they're on base, right? And they're commanding people that they used to be a peer with. And one of
Yes.
those individuals comes in and he's been drinking and he's asking, he didn't know he was going to be put on flight. What do they call it? The flight
Um,
schedule?
oh, say that one more time, Jay.
He didn't know he was being put on the flight schedule. He's supposed to go fly in an
Yep.
hour. He goes and
that's
has
right.
to be taken off because he was drinking.
Yep.
And he doesn't want to be tested because
Oh, yes.
he's going to get in trouble, right?
Oh my gosh. Yes.
So the wonderful thing was that when we tested that out with your airmen, they said, I would really like you to put in there that they've been a friend of mine when I was doing something that was wrong in the Air Force. And so they can leverage me, right?
Right.
How do I operate through that? Let me experience that, because our peers in the Air Force try to leverage us from what they know about us, right? As
Yes.
commanders. I thought that was a beautiful, specific story element, and it makes it more real and it makes it personal and it triggers other mini stories in the brain, right? So Aaron, did you have any thoughts around story, brother, that you wanted to share based on that conversation, or even anything you brought to the table?
Well, I don't want to spend a bunch of time reiterating things. I think you guys know me pretty well at this point that even as a engineer, I agree with you that graphics and the mechanics of the experience are far less important than the story and the ways in which a person inhabits the immersion, the experience itself, right? It indicates the quality of immersion. I think that I had that reinforced for me today in my exploration of the platform that is the web and using it to create immersive experiences. I was reading some documentation today on Mozilla's website. Mozilla was an early proponent of WebVR, what subsequently became WebXR, and they've got a bunch of pages of content on their developer sites. And I thought it was very interesting. There's a paragraph in there that I copied, and I'll paste it in here for everybody, but it says, immersion takes priority over gameplay and graphics. You must feel part of the experience. It's not easy to achieve, but it doesn't require realistic images. On the contrary, even basic shapes soaring past at high frame rates can be thrilling if the experience is immersive. Remember, experimenting is key. Feel free to go with what works well for your project. And so on that note, and you know, given what I think the context of our conversation is, which is, you know, going to a large institution and saying, we have an idea, we want to continue to advance the use of immersion for training, and then having that institution come back and say, well, we've had a lot of luck with high-end simulators. We just think you should try to iterate on that. So my question actually to Andy is, so what's the next step, right? Like, how do you shift the mindset of an organization that one is that has had market success of a certain kind, right? And start to get them to, you know, change the direction.
Yeah. Aaron, it's a great question. It's a perfect question because we are going through that right now. So I had mentioned Jenna Robinson going to ASU, and he put out this immersive challenge, and we have about 6 proposals that have been presented to him, and they're going through modifications and editing and stuff like that. And the question, it's come back to that question right there. I think all 5 of the 6 proposals are like what you mentioned, this traditional proposal. Hey, have some company build us. We're missing a gap in training of maintainers being able to have a marshal aircraft or to fly a plane or do air traffic control, or some of the proposals. We need somebody to build us a VR sim, right? And we've seen this one. Could you build it like that or build it better? Right? It's this high-tech kind of thing to marshal. I want a real aircraft on the flight line. I want to stand there and look just like I am on the flight line in this high-tech type thing. And they've come back, their chief learning engineer has come back and said, you guys need to tell the story, right? Does it have to be, right, a high-end like simulation? What is the story? And so, and everybody's confused. So the Air Force I think is trying to transition into the question that you're asking, and they're not sure how to do it because 99% of educators and trainers, instructional designers in the Air Force have sat in this instructional systems design where like, let's bring in technology in like to meet this objective, and it's going to be this high-end kind of simulation. And like, yep, they need to be able to launch the nuclear missile out of the silo, so we need to have a VR version of a nuclear missile in a silo, and it needs to look just like that. And now they're asking them to, what is the story? And all the instructors and stuff that are on these teams are on a meeting, and their faces are confused. They have this blank stare. They don't know how to answer or respond to story. Now, so Aaron, we're literally walking through this right now in the military. The Army has done a better job of kind of going there, but they've spent a lot more years focusing on how to create immersive training that adds more than just, I think, the technology side, but they still are very technology driven. The Air Force has now just realized the story is probably maybe more important, and it's just one part of it, because then like, so then what do we do in the VR? What's the story though? What's the VR thing? How do we capture data? Right, all these other things. So when we talk about like learning engineering, it takes a consortium of different people together to actually create the effective event that you want for the airmen to get their training. It's not just be able to VR sim and you go do it. It's what's the story? How do we capture data? All these different things called learning engineering. And the thing they've always missed was creating the experience, not just creating the skill set in the VR experience. So that we're literally sitting at that right now, going through this first test phase with these 5-6 proposals to give to AETC in about 2 weeks. I think our proposal that I have, and I've been given feedback, is the only one closest to this, creating a story-driven experience, because we're looking at leadership competencies. How do you develop leadership competencies like in a VR experience? How can airmen practice accountability, decision-making, communication as a team in VR? And I'll tell you what they've done right now, what has happened is they've used things like an escape room, like whether it's in VR or even using like Minecraft escape room on a computer, right? Playing Minecraft on a computer, and a bunch of airmen or cadets or whoever are on their computers or even in VR, and they're in an escape room, on a Minecraft escape room. And like, let's have them, because right, it's a team, they have to get out. But if you've ever done an escape room, you could sit on the side and not do anything, and the team will get out of the escape room, right? Because you don't have to do anything, but there's no story either. It's just get out of the room. Even if you go do if you go do a real escape room, right? If you've ever done those and they give you the video for always some like British accent person, you're a spy agency, you've been trapped they're trying to give you a story, but the story ends there, and also now you're just in this room, right? And so the story is not fully developed. That's what they've done right now in the Air Force with trying to assess leadership competencies by using an escape room. What my students are doing right now in the proposal that we're proposing is writing a story that creates roles right in the story with what we call contested resources, contested objectives in the story. And that's our proposal that hopefully the University of Arizona would build, because that's the partnership that AETC has right now, and that school would build it in partnership with the Dreamscapes company, because their foundation of building things in VR is rooted in story. So that's why they wanted to kind of do it. And I can give you let me give you an example of a story, just to give you the story development of, if you wanted airmen in the Air Force to practice leadership competencies like decision making, accountability, time management, decision making as a team, and you were going to do it in VR, what would it look like, or what would it sound like, kind of thing, versus like, let's use something, or let's build an escape room, or let's build what we call Project X, right? Do this in 15 minutes and you win. Some of my students have called this design by victory, right? No matter what you put them in, you're always going to win. You're always going to complete it.
Happy
But
path.
sometimes with story, you may not, right? And so I'll just give you a story. And remember, my students, none of my students are experts in immersive design, but what they've learned from Aaron, from you, and from JJ and the team that has been part of this network and stuff that we have talked to them about with the immersive story and spatial storytelling and immersion and presence and the taxonomy that we've developed and these types of things. One of my students wrote this thing, imagine you're on a forward operating base in a remote high threat environment facing an imminent attack from a Tyrannosaurus Rex that detected 15 minutes away by perimeter sensor. The forward operating base electrical outer perimeter fence critical for defense is offline due to a recent storm damage the power grid. A team of 5 military members must restore power to the fence to repel the T-Rex while ensuring the medical facility housing critical patients does not lose power for more than 5 minutes. The team must navigate scarce resources, limited fuel for the backup generator, and one functional repair toolkit and a single operational vehicle, while demonstrating leadership competencies aligned with the desired leader attributes found in the Air Force. And that's just sort of beginning development of it. And I have a couple others that did one like on an alien race, a moon-based thing on a moon, all kinds of stories. But to get a story, because what's going to happen if our proposal was to get picked by the ATC commander, they're going to build something, and we're going to have to communicate to Arizona State University's designers. Yes, we want students to be able to apply decision-making, accountability, problem-solving, decision-making, these types of things in a VR experience as a team. So how do you do that instead of it just being some type of simulation and actually make it more of a story? So my students are trying to start the storyline of what it might look like so we can tell the developers, designers. It's more about how do we keep them in this story versus build these widgets and gadgets in the VR thing that, like an escape room type thing, right?
Doc,
long-winded answer there.
Yeah, I've got an idea, and I don't know if it's useful. It sounds good to me, but a lot of my ideas sound good to me. What if you collected stories from commanders? You put out a wide request that says we are looking to try to train through difficult conversations or difficult story experiences that you've had. Please write us an experience that really happened so that we can be building these off of factual moments, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
factual moments are stranger than things that we can create in our head, dude. They're,
yes.
And yet they are logical and they make sense. And so you can empathize and you can grow with them. But my thought is, if you get 200 stories sent in, you and I both know you can train the AI on those stories.
Oh, I know that. Yes, that is such a project. Yes. And JJ, you hit on like the stories that come from our commanders, right? This is right. We use some other conversation simulation avatar stuff here at Air University, right? Where you're talking to an avatar and it's controlled by, sim specialists and stuff. But those stories and simulation, those stories and scenarios that we use are all that came from commanders, right? Yep. And I think you hit on the nail. A term that comes up, I think that just hit with me is called narrative psychology, right? Creating meaning and value from the experiences that we have, right? So narrative psychology is this ability to, take experiences and then communicate meaning and value from those experiences, right? And so this term of narrative psychology is storytelling, right? If I can capture your authentic experiences, right, in this kind of story, it's creating meaning and value that others will probably resonate with and connect with, and they become authentic and real versus me trying to make something up. Because if I make something up, it has no meaning and value because it wasn't meaning and value because it was made up.
But real.
If I take something, yeah.
Yeah, I also think that if you did that, there's a productivity that comes out of your students evaluating the stories that are coming in versus trying to generate them out of 16, 24 people. Aaron, you look like you had something you wanted to bring up, brother.
Well, I mean, I just want to, you went actually, JJ, in a direction that I didn't think you were going to go in. Because usually when you and I have these conversations, we sort of fall back on more of a sort of, I'll call it an improvisational model. And I think that looking at some of the things that ChatGPT is telling me about story too, as a refresher, I think what you just proposed to Andy in going and getting these real life, real lived things, right? Like that is you're building a bank of structure, really, to draw from. And that's one of those major story elements. The story has to have a beginning and a middle and in the end, and the dinosaur eats you, right? Yes. And so that's still only one component. I think another component that we haven't talked much about yet is the component of goals. And I think this is one of those interesting things where improvisation may drive a lot of the immersion, because if you have 4 players and 3 of them have compatible goals, but a 4th has an incompatible goal, and they're all told what their goals are coming into the experience, but they aren't all told what everyone's goals are.
Yes.
Now they're wandering their way through a collective goal that they've been given, i.e., survive the dinosaur attack.
Yes.
But they don't know, right? And so as a leadership training simulator, right, ever and always, it doesn't really matter what the story is that's going on. The training is getting people to enter into conflict-oriented dialogue with one another, seeing who emerges, hopefully all of them, as leaders, right? And to guide the resolution of conflict. That's always the arc.
Yep.
And so I think that would be a really powerful thing. You just, as they come into the simulator, you're feeding them the goals. And now that they're all in the simulator, the intro is given. The dinosaur is coming. Here are the circumstances. That guy has his hand on the generator. This one has his hand on the button for the electric fence. This one has his hand on the computer that's, running the crypto algorithm, trying to hack into, the control panel. And they can't all use them at once. But character A is secretly in love with character D.
Yeah, that's exactly what I told my students, and this is what I told Arizona State University. This is what I told Dreamscapes. This is what I told AETC when they talked about story, and especially when we're talking about in the human domain and what I focus on, leadership competencies. But it could be anything, and so there's a couple terms that we have learned from. And JJ, right? So we worked with Shenandoah University, where we had the senior students in the VR program kind of take this as a first test, and take our physical leadership reaction course that the Air Force uses, where we have 6 students that are trying to get from point A to point B, right? And it's a physical obstacle course. There's a wall in front of you. You got to carry these canisters, and you have this rope and a stretcher, and you got to get all 6 people from point A to point B, but you can't touch the water. You have to go over the wall. You have 15 minutes to do it, right? It's just an objective, and that's what the Air Force has used for the last 60 years to assess leadership in the Air Force. So what we've taken is, and what I'm trying to teach my students is, what if we did this in a virtual space, but we changed the design concepts, right? And so that's what we did with Shenandoah University. We asked them, can you build a virtual, we'll call it a virtual project X, but I don't want it to be a project X, right? Because you can't take this physical leadership reaction course and just put it into VR and say it's going to work, because the physical things in a physical leadership reaction course is going to be quite different in VR. So how do you make these stressors, the objectives, equivalent to this physical leadership reaction course in a VR space? This is where story comes in. This is where, what Aaron, you just said, contested objectives, right? Contested a storyline. And so we started doing that with Shenandoah University. We kind of got there, but they only had a few weeks to months to do it. But this is now what we're pitching to AETC. Aaron, exactly what you said. They're our scenario. These scenarios are going to have contested resources, contested objectives. So there's an overall objective, and this is military. Right. This is why we think it's perfect. In the Air Force, when we deploy, there's an overall mission objective, right? But there's 6 different functional teams, functional people working together. A security forces, a pilot, a medical person, logistics. They're all on the same team deploying, doing the same mission at the base they're going to. But they each have their own kind of objectives and things they also have to do. They don't always all know that. So that's how we're designing these scenarios, which we call contested objectives and contested resources. So then there is this conflicting dialogue that's going to occur in the story when they're all trying to meet the same overall objective, but they have their individual ones that they don't all know unless they communicate, and there's contested resources. We both need the fuel, we both need, right, the medical supplies or whatever, right? And so to achieve our objective, but is either one of our objectives going to help meet the overall mission objective, or do both going to help meet it, or whatever? This is the things that they have to figure out, and that type of experience allows the students to demonstrate for us these leadership competencies of accountability and decision making and resource management, and working together and conflict negotiation, right? An experience because of the story, Aaron, what you just mentioned, right? What we call contested objectives, contested resources, which most don't understand. JJ, and jump in.
So I just wanted to point out. Oh shoot! I just lost it. Keep going where you were at, brother. I'm sorry.
Yeah. But Aaron, I was learning, Aaron, when you said that, that's what my students are developing as these scenarios of how do we develop this.
So let's talk very quickly about the essential elements that are needed for somebody to have an experience. So we're talking about the participants, them being in a first-person story, right? The first thing they need to know is who they are.
Yes.
Most experiences do not change who they are, so they just show up as themselves, right? But first, you can give them character parameters, right? The second thing you need to show them is where they are, right? Interestingly enough, in early VR, that's all I got. I was under the ocean, I was on the moon, I'm somewhere, right? The third thing, which is important, is what am I doing, right? And that's not yet evolved in objectives. That's activities. What am I doing, right?
Yep.
Am I searching cybersecurity? Am I battling cybersecurity? Am I fixing an engine on an airplane? Am I, going through accounting lists? What am I doing, right?
Yeah.
And then, and that's before we add the why, right? Because I'm like, okay, I'm here. I know who I am. I'm trying to hold these thoughts in my head. Activity gets me into the flow, okay? Then there's a disruption in that world. Now, it's important to know that you can set all this up through exposition if you want to in a paragraph before people step into the situation.
Yes.
Or you can build it into the seamless experience, right? So there's a disruption. And the disruption in the world that Aaron was talking about is one of the people has a counter objective that is interfering with everyone else. So the disruption is our stuff isn't working, right?
Yeah.
Now the participants have to actively solve the challenge. And that's the improvisational moment, right?
Yes.
At the end, they end up with a new world, a new normal, right? They either succeed, they fail, they end up with a new normal, right? So you will need to establish who they are. You don't need to do that if you're expecting them to be them. Actually, you kind of need to reroute them in themselves if you want them to think as themselves in the story.
Yes.
Yeah, Aaron, go ahead.
Can I just take one shot at this? I would hate to be the last person to speak on this call, but these things didn't mean what I thought they meant at first. Contested objectives in particular, and I want to see if I'm tracking now, right? So back to the T-Rex escape room example, right?
Yep.
So let's pretend that it's a 4-player game, and each of the players have a clear rank or role within the context that's normal to this base, right?
Yep.
One is a 4-star general, and another one is a janitor, right? And they're very clear roles that are very different with different expectations for one another. And each one of the players inhabits that, right? And that's not necessarily in alignment with what they do on a daily basis. So they've got to get in that mindset. Oh, I'm a 4-star general. Great. One of those 4 players at the start of the game is told secretly that they have the plans for the Death Star, right?
Yep.
And that it's top secret that they have that, and that revealing that to anybody else results in a threat to the mission security of the whole thing. And there's a helicopter, but it only has room for 2 people in it, right? So the contested objective is to get the Death Star plans off the base before the T-Rex kills everybody. But when the plans are in the hand of the janitor, and the janitor isn't allowed to say that he has the plans, right? Right out of the gate, we have this ranking conflict, right? There's a baseline expectation, that the most important people on the ground are the ones that need to get into the air, right? I think if you combine that with the contested resources thing, which is like they've all got their normal operational things that they're concerned with. This guy's got his finger in this button, and this guy's got his finger on this button. And if they're not paying attention to that, the T-Rex gets closer, right? So that creates this pressure of we've got to resolve this fast. We don't know exactly what we're trying to resolve, but we know we can only put 2 people on the helicopter. Is that right? Is that the contested objectives, contested resources thing?
You are, yeah, and you're on it. We like for our like a 5-star for us would be just the commander of the team, and then like an operations officer, a medical officer, an engineer, and like an person. Like it's kind of how like in general, right? And so now that they may know like everybody's things. Like so, ours would be almost like each of these officers has like their objective. Like the medical officer, right, is trying to prioritize the medical facility and the care of the alien creatures, right? But the overall objective is ensure the T-Rex doesn't come. So like if we put the power towards the laser defense to keep the T-Rex from coming, right? Good, we met the objective. But the overall objective is ensure like the alien. But if you don't take care of the T-Rex, you all die. But if we also don't like provide some power to the medical side, and the medical officer is like, that's your objective,
right?
But that person's gonna be like, yeah, but my objective is like take care of these patients. The commander's like, I get it. That's part of my objective too, because I'm the overall commander. But I also gotta make sure the entire team and the whole base doesn't get eaten by the T-Rex, right? So you see how they're having to compete, and the resource, the contested resource is there's not enough power to do both at the same time. You could do one for a little bit, and then so now you got to figure out like which is more important, which has more value, and these types of things is kind of the thing. And this is why we have roles now, right? So we call this an MPERG, a multiplayer educational role playing game, right? So the storytelling design, right, requires MPERGs, is what JJ mentioned. You got to bring them who they are, the first experience, who they are, right? Or if them themselves, but I think we can do it. We do it with roles, because if you just like did an escape room, you don't have roles. You go into an escape room, you go to a physical escape room or a virtual escape room, you're just there and could do nothing, right? Because you have no role. And our research shows like if they have a role, whether you're a commander, the ops officer, the medical officer, engineer, you have a role and probably an objective. So now I have role, where you are, right? The storyline, like the epilogue that JJ kind of mentioned at the beginning, or as they come into or at these things hidden. But yeah, Aaron, you're right on spot. This is kind of that contested resources objectives. Ours wouldn't be so much like you may not know it. It's more like you do know, but because in the chain of command, the commander, right, has what we call mission command, right? And so we all know that the commander says like, this is the overall objective. And so he or she has to figure out mission command. Because that commander also knows like each of my subordinates also has objectives in command that they have to deal with as well. But that's why the commander gets the big bucks, because he has to manage all of the command of these objectives. But the individual people, the medical person has enough emotional intelligence and an understanding that I have to meet my boss's mission command, which is to save the base. But I also have an objective of like how much can I save of the alien race, right, kind of thing, or the research that we had and stuff like that. So yeah, you're spot on.
So here we are getting close to the hour, and it's been a blur for me because I have loved this conversation. And Doc, just to put you on the spot, I wonder, might you have another hour next Thursday at noon and we do a part 2 of this?
I would love that. I am checking, just double checking.
Because I'd really like to talk about conventions and our conversation about conventions and the story conventions.
I am totally free at this same time for the next hour or two at the same time frame. I was thinking conventions too. We didn't get to conventions, and I'd love to. And Anthony, I know there's got to, because I mean Anthony has a, I think, whole perspective on story from his expertise.
Yeah, Anthony, you want to throw out anything to us as we round out?
Oh, I think it's just kind of funny that there's all this talk about story and immersion and how the two are connected. And ultimately, what I kept hearing and what I kept thinking through the entire conversation is fundamentals, right?
Yep.
No matter where you are, you can't forget your fundamentals, because you guys laid it out in beautiful terms that immersion essentially is almost equated to spectacle, right? It's the thing that's happening on the back end, built on top of a foundation of fundamentals. Without the story, the spectacle does nothing. If you have two independent filmmakers who make a movie, and one spends $1 million and one spends 50,000, but the guy who spends $1 million, he spends $1 million to make it look good. He or she spends $1 million to have high-end cameras and actors of a certain caliber or whatever. But the person with the better script who shoots it with an iPhone is the one that wins the Oscar.
Talking about Michael Bay. Is that?
No, no,
No,
I'm not.
Huge thing.
I'm not at all. I'm actually talking about two completely independent filmmakers who spend a different amount of money to make their film, and it has nothing to do with the amount of money that you spend. It has to do with the fundamentals that exist at the foundation of it. And that's what I just kept taking away from this conversation is, without the foundation, and the other part was the universal language. You were talking, Andy, about, the reaction to the word story. And sometimes I'm like, maybe there's another word that they understand separate from story. What's the situation? What's the protocol? What is the buzzword that needs to resonate that means the same thing in a different situation? And it boils down to fundamentals.
Yep. Who are you?
Yeah.
Where are you? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Yeah, it's all basic stuff. And then you can add subplots and relationships and those details. They just stack because all of it is a layer.
Yeah.
Right.
There's like,
It's just another layer. Thank you all so much for being here today, Dr. Clayton. As always, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Then I will see you here next week for a part 2.
Yes.
And we'll get into conventions and the power of conventions as they move into a 3-dimensional world. Aaron, thank you so much, brother, and Tony, everybody for joining us.